back with America's Forum on Newsmax TV. I'm J.D. Hayworth. Secretary of State John Kerry backpedaling after igniting a firestorm over saying Israel could become an apartheid state. Kerry defending his support for Israel, but now says apartheid is a word best left out of the debate. Kerry now says this about his comments, quote, "I've been around long enough to also know the power of words to create a misimpression, even when unintentional, and if I could rewind the tape, I would have chosen a different word to describe my firm belief that the only way in the long term to have a Jewish state and two peoples and two nations living side by side in peace and security is through a two-state solution." Now, the transcript of the secret audio of Kerry, first published by Josh Rogan of the Daily Beast.
This is how John Kerry speaks when he thinks the cameras are not rolling.
And John Kerry, obviously having problems, pro-Israel groups in America call the Secretary's choice of words deeply troubling, especially as Israel was marking Holocaust Remembrance Day. And President Obama back in 2008 said invoking apartheid does not advance a two-state solution because the term is, quote, emotionally loaded, historically inaccurate, and not what I believe, close quote. Joining us now, another one of my congressional colleagues, Pete Hoekstra, former chairman of the House Intelligence Committee. Pete, once again, we thank you for joining us today via Skype. Now,
hey, good to be with you, JD.
Now, you had President Obama as candidate Obama back in 2008 saying one thing, John Kerry saying something else. Why hasn't President Obama spoken out on Kerry's situation? And should John Kerry just call it quits?
Well, I think the president's not speaking about it because why would the president want to bring attention to, something outrageous that his Secretary of State has just said? And remember, this is, Secretary of State Kerry could keep the president really, really busy with all the statements that he's making. It was a few months ago that he basically said something along the lines of, if Israel doesn't move forward in the peace process, they're going to become isolated and the rest of the world is just going to impose economic sanctions, almost inviting the rest of the world to impose economic sanctions and implying that America would stand on the sidelines. Now he's done the same type of thing by using the word apartheid. And so, the president's got other things to do. He can't keep apologizing for Secretary of State Kerry, if you can get my sarcasm.
Well, sarcasm aside, there may be those, Pete, who have just joined us. I tell you what, why don't we take a listen to what it was that Kerry originally said, this recording obtained by Fox News.
The unitary state winds up either being an apartheid state with second-class citizens, or it winds up being a state that destroys the capacity of Israel to be a Jewish state.
All right, the audio quality is bad, but the A word comes through crystal clear. So apartheid, and now he says it's just choosing the wrong word. Did President Obama choose the wrong Secretary of State to succeed Hillary Clinton?
Well, I mean, clearly Secretary of State Kerry is creating a difficult situation for the president and for this administration and for America. Remember, Israel's our best ally in the Middle East. They are our friend. They have been ever since their existence. The policies of this administration, and I think this is where you have to look at it in a larger context, JD. The situation for Israel has become much more tenuous in the last 5 years than what it's been in a long time. Israel is wondering whether the U.S. has its back, and then you put together these kinds of statements from Secretary of State Kerry, and we really, and a lot of people in the Middle East, other than Israel, are wondering whether the United States has Israel's back, and that just makes it very, very uncomfortable for Israel right now. It jeopardizes their security, their national security, and that's why they're so nervous about this Secretary of State. It's why they're so nervous about this administration and its policies in totality.
Well, Pete, there's another angle to John Kerry going out and visiting behind closed doors with the Trilateral Commission. Another report appearing in the Daily Beast, Kerry again to the Trilateral Commission, claiming that our intelligence community has recordings of pro-Russian forces. He says the U.S. has proof that the Russian government in Moscow is running a network of spies inside eastern Ukraine. This notion of Secretary Kerry going to the Trilateral Commission with this information, the Trilateral Commission, which arguably blurs the lines of sovereignty, to say the least, is this the appropriate conduct of an American Secretary of State in terms of the intelligence community and sharing this kind of intelligence?
I would think not, again, because if you take a look at the larger context, when Russia started to move into Crimea, the word on the street was the U.S. had no indication that Russia was considering being that aggressive. What the Russians heard when they saw those kinds of press reports was, wow, the United States doesn't have the intelligence, they don't have the tools to penetrate our electronic communications. We have secure networks for communicating between each other about what we're doing, and so we can just keep using those systems because we are secure. What Secretary Kerry has now told them is your communications, they are not secure. The Americans were able to penetrate them. We've got the, we have the recordings. Guess what? The Russians aren't going to use the current technology and the current systems in place. They will find alternative ways of communicating. And if they really thought, 4 months ago that we were dark and they were now told that the U.S. has penetrated their systems, that is a major breach of intelligence, of the intelligence world, and it is a wonderful gift to the Russians. I hope that, I hope that's not the case, but yeah, the real question is, why is Secretary Kerry talking about that to the Trilateral Commission? That is a granularity, that is a detail that those folks don't need to know.
And given his chattiness and his comfort in speaking to the Trilateral Commission, again, we come back to a question. And our former colleague, Ed Royce, now chairman of the House Foreign Affairs Committee, who joined us on this program prior to you coming on, Pete, said, in a sense, it's good to have Kerry as Secretary of State because it lets the American people have a truth in labeling moment. We see the intent of this administration in terms of foreign policy. But again, and let's drill down a little bit more, from an intelligence perspective, for Secretary Kerry to go to the Trilateral Commission, in previous administrations, that would be a firing offense. So I know Ted Cruz in the Senate has called for John Kerry to go. Do you want to see Kerry take a powder, ankle, Amscray, get out of Foggy Bottom?
Well, number one, we shouldn't be finding out what America's real foreign policy is by, getting tape recordings of what the Secretary of State says behind closed doors. Our foreign policy ought to be right out there, and it ought to be clear to the American people. It ought to be clear to our allies, and it ought to be clear to those who are in disagreement with the United States. And I think what Chairman Royce is saying is, what John Kerry is saying behind closed doors, especially towards Israel, is exactly what our foreign policy is. We have not been the backstop behind Israel. We have jeopardized their security by our policies, regardless of what the president is saying to the American people publicly. But I don't want to know our foreign policy by intercepted communications or backroom recordings. In terms of going to the Trilateral Commission, that is a problem. That's problematic for us. That's not necessarily where we want to be. This administration, again, consistently has sided with organizations that are either suspect or are openly hostile to the United States. They're doing it all by saying, hey, we'll talk to anybody. But Again, other people will look at this. They will see weakness. They will see indecision and indecisiveness in American foreign policy. That's a dangerous place for the U.S. to be.
Pete Hoekstra, we appreciate your perspective as the former chairman of a House Intelligence Committee. And tomorrow we may not be overtaken by headlines. You'll have a chance to make some more news with your intelligence brief. We appreciate it very much.
Always good to talk to you. Thanks, JD.
Pete Hoekstra, my old congressional colleague. So now it's not just the apartheid comment. You just heard Pete Hoekstra detailing what John Kerry did, again telling the Trilateral Commission about the recordings we had of the Russian agents. Should Kerry stay on the job? We're asking you. You can get back to us via Twitter at Newsmax TV, hashtag America's Forum. Email us, connect at newsmaxtv.com. And of course, there's also Facebook. There's more to come.